Perfect. How's it going? I'm Joe. I'm the state senator here. I see a lot of new faces, so welcome to the 34th Dems meeting. We are the best LD, partially because we have a hosted bar, but also the wonderful people that are here as well. So thank you so much for having all of us. You know what's interesting, seeing all the newly elected folks speaking earlier, I'm so proud of the work that you've done. And as a person who this time last year was just elected, it's amazing to see people who are doing the work, getting out there, connecting with the community. I saw Aaron, I saw Sophia, I saw Kevin, and everybody else, and they knocked on doors, talked to people, and really made sure that they prioritized the voices of those in the community over everybody else. And I think that's why you won. So again, congratulations. Unless there's any other elected officials, good job on winning as well. Yeah. But yeah, no, thank you so much. I serve on the Human Services Committee, on the Transportation Committee, which will be very fun this year, on the Environment, Energy, and Technology Committee as well, and on a little committee called Rules, which is also very fun.
And since I see Representative council member. He's been so damn many elected things I can't remember. Joe McBurnett came in late, so I just wanted to put that in. Anyone is late. Yeah, it was really tough. Anyhow, I am represented by Cody, and I have been serving you all for several years. Actually started out in the 11th and then switched to the 34th, so I was actually trying to figure out how many years was really the 34th, and I don't know, I think it was 17, since 2002. 17. All right, so anyhow, I am still the chair of the House Health Care Committee and on the Appropriations Committee, so that's what keeps me busy. And of course, you know, we'll talk about all the different things, but there's plenty going on in that arena.
I'm Representative Joe Fitzgibbon, and thank you all so much for taking the time to come and chat with us tonight about your priorities. I've served you in the House of Representatives for 9 years, and I am the chair of the House Environment and Energy Committee. I'm on the House Appropriations Committee, and I'm on the House Agriculture and Natural Resources Committee. One other hat that I wear is I'm also the chair of the House Democratic Campaign Committee, which is responsible for protecting and growing the majority in the House of Representatives in Washington State. Very proud that in the 2018 election, it was the first year since 2006 that we actually picked up seats in the House, picked up 7 seats, and we immediately put them to work, passing the most progressive agenda that we have in decades. Super grateful for all of the work that you all did to help make sure that those candidates in the swing districts got over the finish line. Finally, a lot of work went into planning this event tonight, so can we just take a minute to thank the great executive board members, Carla and Rachel and Gina and Jordan, and the entire executive board for getting us all ready for this exciting event. So, with that.
Sorry.
Hello. Thank you again for being here, and welcome again, everybody. Thank you all for coming to the town hall tonight. We're going to get right started. We have a question from one of your constituents, Steve Richmond. Do you have your question ready?
Thank you all. I work in forest restoration around King County, and I'm alarmed at the spread of invasive species, particularly ivy, English ivy, and English holly. In Seattle, it took 100 years for ivy to cover 50% of our urban forests. Science is corroborating what we're seeing on the ground. UW professor Dr. David Stokes says holly is increasing exponentially, doubling every 6 years, having the potential to become a dominant species in a few decades, transforming the region's native forests on a large scale. Nothing is stopping ivy and holly, and we are reaching a tipping point where it can soon be ungettable. What's frustrating is the hard work we do in public forests is being compromised by seed sources on private land. This dilutes public money, and it also is very damaging to remove ivy, is damaging to topsoil, and therefore damaging to stormwater, to salmon and orcas. We have no choice but to motivate control of invasive species on all land, public and private. My question is, did I adequately convey the emergency that this is? And would you read and consider my proposal for an incentive approach to motivate cooperation rather than mandates? And I have a proposal here I'd ask you to read and consider. You don't really have to comment, but thank you for listening.
Okay, I'll take a quick swing at it. I do want to read your proposal and learn what you're proposing. Thank you, Steve. I think this is a pet peeve of mine as well. Maybe pet peeve is too soft of a word. Our ecosystems are at risk from invasive species, and it's one of the less well-known threats to the health of Puget Sound, to the health of our forests, to the health of all of our waterways, the health of our wildlife. English ivy is not a native species here. When it crowds out those native species, that means there's less food for our salmon, because the native insects that live on our native plants here are what provide food for those salmon. As Steve said, English ivy does not retain the topsoil in the same way that our native plants do, and causes more runoff. When it grows really thick into trees, it actually acts like a big sail, so in a bad windstorm, trees can topple because they're catching the wind because of how much ivy is growing all over them. This is a huge problem. It's a problem in our urban areas, it's a problem in our rural areas too. In fact, the State of the Salmon report that came out last year identified that out on the coastal Washington, where there's less where development isn't the threat to the health of salmon and the health of waterways out on the coast, it's actually invasive species like ivy, like Scotch broom, like Himalayan blackberry, like English holly. We have a lot we have to do here. I think that we need both regulations and incentives to try to get these lands removed from these species that are crowding out our native plants and ultimately our native animals too. I am happy I'm very glad you brought this up, Steve, and I'm also happy to report that my colleague Beth Olio from Olympia is already working on really ambitious legislation for 2020 to ban the sale of English ivy in nurseries in Washington State, which is, you kind of wonder, why do we still sell these things? Invasive species are not supposed to be sold in nurseries in our state, but ivy is exempt from that, and we need to close that loophole, and for holly as well. So this is one of the lesser known but very impactful issues that's threatening the health of the environment in our state, and we have a lot of work to do, so I'm looking forward to reading your proposal.
We'll go to our next question, which is from Claire Yurden. Is Claire here? Claire, come on up and you can ask your question.
Good evening. Thank you for coming here. I really appreciate it. And to see you in person. I wrote this online, and this is perhaps even more relevant since 976 went the way it did in the state. What are the prospects for a graduated income tax in Washington, or a capital gains tax, so that the state can be financed in a less regressive manner?
Yeah, so, yes, 100%. And to quickly touch on 976, I think that was more of an indictment on regressive taxation and the need for more accountability as a whole. So I don't see that as an indictment on transit per se. On the idea of a graduated income tax and capital gains, there's a lot of conversations associated with that right now. Last year, we passed legislation to allow for a tax structure work group to study the different options that we have, and that is certainly on the agenda. And what's interesting is I was invited to an event, oddly enough, with the Chamber of Commerce, where we talked about an income tax with the Chamber of Commerce, the one that just put $1.5 million into the race in Seattle. So even they understand the need for a less regressive structure. The work group itself is defined for 4 years to figure out what that solution looks like, but that doesn't mean we should stop pushing for progressive taxation, especially when it comes to things like capital gains that impacts very, very few people. I actually have another bill for wealth inequality as well that I think is really good that we should pass. But the Senate honestly has been traditionally very conservative when it came to progressive taxation. So it's incumbent upon me and some of the other new members to push that narrative in our own caucuses because we're very new. Well, I'm new. I'm actually new, but like they're very new to having the conversation about progressive taxation. So I think one of the biggest things that we can do is help educate our other members in terms of what this means and how that should impact the people here.
I would agree that I think that especially on capital gains, the House has kind of been, we've been pushing it for some time, and I think though maybe with some of the changes that were made in the Senate this summer, that I think that we might be able to see that next year.
Yeah, and I just want to, praise Joe for the bill that he mentioned, a bill to levy an additional B&O tax on excessive compensation on businesses that are paying their CEOs vastly more than they're paying the working people on the ground doing those hard jobs day in, day out. I think that's a really important conversation for us to have, and I want to thank Joe for bringing that idea to the table. Capital gains, I think we're close. We have the votes in the House. I think we're very close in the Senate. Maybe. Yep. One other tax that doesn't get as much attention because we've already got it is the estate tax. That's the most progressive tax that we have in Washington State, and the estates of millions of dollars that when someone passes away, that the state collects a portion of that revenue. The Donald Trump tax bill significantly cut the federal estate tax and raised the exemption level for it to I think like $11 million from I think it was like $2 million before. So anybody who's a state between $2 and $11 million, no longer has to pay it. I think that we should claw that back. I think that we should capture some of the taxes that Donald Trump and the now formerly Republican Congress, formerly Republican House, passed into law in 2017. I think the state should recoup some of that money and reinvest that into the needs of the people of our communities.
In addition to having more progressive taxation, I think it is incumbent upon Democrats to also be more mindful of just accountability and transparency in terms of how that's spent. Because I think that's one of the narrative pieces that we don't do a good enough job of explaining that we're paying for education, we're paying for transportation, we're paying for all these things that we actually need. So it's kind of a twofold impact.
So we have an audience question, just kind of a follow-up on the capital gains issue. How do each of you plan to ensure that middle-class retirees with rental property land are protected?
Yeah, in the bills themselves, there are certain levels of exemptions. So retirement accounts, those aren't touched at all. And then even then, on some primary residence, they're not touched at all. And then for certain businesses, it's a certain amount up to a couple of million or a few $1 million as well. So if you're truly a small business and your net profit isn't like in the millions, you likely won't be impacted by some of this stuff. So if there's a specific concern, obviously we'd love to chat with folks, but the way that it's been structured really would impact probably about 2,200 people or less, or around that ballpark in Washington State. So if you're impacted by it, like congratulations, you're very rich. But if there's a loophole, then obviously we'll figure it out.
Yeah, because this was my question. So the question, I totally am in favor of capital gains when you're talking about billionaires, but this actually affects me, who's not even a millionaire, because while it protects retirement accounts, it doesn't protect retirees who might have a second rental unit that they want to sell, because that's not a retirement account. So I'll be hit with that capital gains, and I didn't invest in the stock market, I invested in a second home to rent, an affordable rent at that. So I'm hit by something that was designed for billionaires. So the question is, how are you going to protect some retirees in the middle class?
I don't remember the level. Yeah, your house is probably not worth $3 million, is it, to rent? No, it's.
Yeah. So we can chat after this too, but there's exemptions for primary residents, but also if you're, no, I get it. And also, if it's your business, so if it's your rental income, it's a business, right? So there are certain exemptions for amounts of assets associated with that as well. So we talked with like auto dealers, we talked with small business owners. So people who, like farmers, this largely was for farmers that will impact you as well. So the biggest thing to pay attention to and that we'll work with you on is making sure that there are certain exemptions for small business owners which you would qualify as to make sure that you're not disproportionately impacted by it. Yeah. Don't worry, we got a plan for that.
So the next question from Ann Mark.
Thank you. Well, you introduced me. Hi, thank you for being here, and thank you for all the work you guys are doing. My question relates to actually a piece of legislation that Senator Joe, I'm going to say Representative Joe, Senator Joe, Councilmember Joe, to distinguish. It's regarding zero-emission vehicles, and I wanted to know what the status of that legislation is and what you expect to do with the legislation in the coming session. I will be introducing a resolution in support of zero-emission vehicles at the board meeting next week, and hopefully we will talk about this in January. So, what's happening and what are you going to do about it?
Yeah, so for those who don't have the context for zero-emission vehicles, in order to have a mandate in terms of what you need to provide, only California is allowed to do it. So at the federal level, you can't do it piecemeal. So our bill would basically have our emission standards be the same as California. What's interesting is that the Trump administration went after this a couple of weeks ago, almost a month ago at this point, and our governor and our attorney general, Bob Ferguson, sued, and I think they won. So not fully decided just yet, but hopefully they will win. I mean, this track record's pretty good. So we want to have that in Washington State. Other states have that right now as well. This got pretty far last year. We did a lot of great things last year, and it's on the docket again for next year. And actually, Joe has probably.
Yeah, we're going to do it. It's time for us to adopt the zero-emission vehicle mandate. So this means electric cars, hydrogen cars primarily. That automakers have to have a certain percentage of their fleet that are not polluting, that are not gas-powered vehicles. And one of the things that I keep hearing is that there are certain automakers that don't even sell electric cars in the state because they're not required to. And so I was curious about that. I've heard that story a couple times. So I called up Hyundai of Seattle. Hyundai is one of the manufacturers that doesn't do this. And I said, hey, I'm in the market for an electric car. And they said, oh great, you want a new or a used electric car? I said, I want a new electric car. I was lying. I don't know. I don't have a car. But then 30 minutes later, they call me back and they say, we don't actually sell those in Washington. And I was like, oh, why is that? And they said, oh, something about the law, something about the law. Hyundai won't sell us. Hyundai doesn't, even though this dealership wants to sell electric cars, Hyundai will not sell them into the state because they're not required to. I think the time has come for us to pass this law. I think that we should have more consumer choice. We shouldn't have cars that are available to car buyers in Oregon and California and in New York and New Jersey and the other states that have this law. So I think this is going to be one of the big bills that we get done in 2020 to address the climate crisis in transportation.
Representative Joe, I wish you'd called me because 3 years ago, we had to go down to Central Oregon because Portland wouldn't sell any more than 5 vehicles. And Clark County people had already bought all the Washington allocation. So we had to go down into Central Oregon before we could get our Volt because they weren't available. So I'm glad you experienced that because that's exactly my interest. We went to used vehicles. We've got an electric Fiat and now we've got an electric Tesla used, which are available here in Washington State because leases run out. But thank you, that is exactly the problem.
Yes, our next question is, this is Tim Brandt from Burien with a question for you all.
I've been a Democrat since the late 60s, Henry Jackson supporter, okay, my question, it's been a long time since I've been to one of these meetings. Why can't the Democrats kind of fix these the depreciation schedule for car tabs. I think that was part of the problem that just, working people are paying big money for these cars just to get to work, and they got to pay for these tabs, but it doesn't seem fair.
Yeah, I sit on the transportation committee, and also a big fan of Scoop Jackson as well. It's fantastic. So the interesting thing is, again, I think this really goes back to our regressive tax structure. That's fundamentally, I think, the problem. And when I sat down before I was even elected to go over this issue, I compared average cars with the MVET schedule, which we have right now, and then with the KBB model. And what's interesting, if you look at the MVET model, the cars that are newer, so generally more expensive, actually pay a little bit more, and the cars that were older paid a bit less. And the difference between them oftentimes was like 30 to 40 bucks per. So candidly, even if we had changed it, I don't think that would have changed the outcome as much as we would have liked. I think Tim Eyman was using that narrative, but when I sat down and did the math, it didn't really pencil out. No, I get it. 60 whatever percent. It's a lot of folks do not want regressive car tax.
They should just follow Kelly Blue Book, that's all.
Well, what I'm saying, candidly, I think even if we changed it to Kelly Blue Book, I think it would have the same. I think it would have had the same outcome because you still would have seen a pretty significant jump.
So I guess the question is why didn't that happen?
Why didn't we change it?
Yeah, if there wouldn't have been a change, because this has been a narrative that has been going in Washington State. And so the question is why wasn't it changed over the last 2 years?
Yeah, no, because we had discussions about it, and actually the bill had been introduced, and why we never got it passed was because we couldn't figure out how to get the money that would be the loss to Sound Transit in, and that was where the argument between, so we didn't have the votes is what it amounted to.
Yeah, well, we actually passed a bill in 2017 to not to make the Kelly Blue Book. You can't reference the Kelly Blue Book in state law. It's a private it's a private document, and we're not going to reference something that a business can go change at any time. Well, there is a different depreciation schedule that we passed a bill out of the House to move towards in 2017. The Senate, which was Republican at the time, killed it because they wanted to keep this issue alive. They thought this was an issue they could run on and elect Republicans on. Well, that isn't what happened. But what it fundamentally came down to is we would have been not able to complete light rail to West Seattle or to Everett or to Tacoma. There are a lot of projects that would have been jeopardized if we weren't able to find other money to replace the hole in Sound Transit's budget that blew. And that was not something, we weren't able to find the billions of dollars that would have additionally had to restore the Sound Transit's budget.
Where are you at?
Well, the initiative passed. Initiative 976 passed, right? So, hear what you're saying. The reason that we didn't pass it before is because we would have had to cancel a light rail project. And we've been working for 50 years to try to get light rail to West.
Okay, so our next question is written from somebody here tonight, Kevin Jones. Before I read the question, Annie Phillips has a question as well. Annie, can you make your way up here just so that you're right on dot when we're ready to go to your question. So you'll be next, Annie. This is from Kevin to Joe Fitzgibbon. Thanks for your leadership on HB 1110, clean fuels. I see this is a 2020 priority. Given a short session and the Senate Transportation Committee vote in 2020, how can we help pass this bill in 2020?
Thanks. So the bill that Kevin's referencing is my top priority bill. It's a bill to implement a clean fuel standard for transportation fuels, to require the transportation fuels gradually shift towards less polluting options over time. So this will reduce greenhouse gas emissions. It'll create rural jobs in parts of our state that can now produce feedstocks like forest product waste or canola oil or dairy manure, and turn that into cleaner fuels to both reduce greenhouse gas emissions and to improve air quality. Air quality in our state is worse in the neighborhoods that are closest to highways, and those tend to be lower income neighborhoods. The people who are most impacted in terms of their health are the people who are living in neighborhoods like South Park and Georgetown and Delridge, where there's a lot of car traffic. In fact, there was a study that just came out a few weeks ago that showed that like brain development for fetuses is impacted by these diesel fine particulates that people inhale that come off of trucks. That the fuel that trucks consume on the road produces this fine particulate matter which mothers inhale, and that their babies can have their lifelong learning disabilities as a result of this pollution. So, as well as climate change is also bad. This bill, we passed this bill out of the House this last year. It was probably one of the most brutal floor debates I've been through for a while. It was about, I don't know, 6-hour-long floor debate. We made it through the Environment Committee in the Senate, which Joe sits on, and it's stalled in the Senate Transportation Committee. We're going to pass it out of the House again, very early next session. And so to Kevin's question, what can we do to try to get movement on this, is I would say identify other supporters of climate action and of clean air and of rural jobs in other districts around the state, particularly in districts that are maybe out on the outer suburban edges, like in maybe Snohomish County, and encourage those people to really keep their legislators' feet to the fire, their senators' feet to the fire in particular, because that's where the bill stalled last year. This is a huge opportunity for Washington State. This is the policy that British Columbia, Oregon, California all have. Canada, now that they've been through their election, they're about to adopt it nationwide. And we're the outlier. We're the outlier on the West Coast because we haven't passed this bill because the oil industry has their foot on it. And we need to make sure that the heat gets turned up on those key senators who are standing in the way of progress. Yeah, one senator.
This is a pretty great segue into Annie's question, and here's the mic, you can read it.
The climate crisis is the issue of the day, and we can all help mitigate its advance. But so many people are still in denial or think they have no influence. We need a huge public awareness campaign like women's suffrage, LGBTQ acceptance, cigarette smoking, helmet wearing for bikers, mothers against drunk drivers. But we have so little time. Can the legislature dedicate funding and responsibility for a climate awareness campaign in Washington?
You know, I'm not sure that the legislature is the best messenger to the public. We don't have people who are lower information tend to have not a lot of trust in government, and that's inclusive of state government. So I think if we have additional dollars that we're going to put into climate change mitigation, I want to invest those first in just the direct reductions. In fact, there was an ask that the governor had in his budget, in the last budget, to buy lots of new electric cars for state government so that state fleets are not polluting so much, and unfortunately we weren't able to get that funded in the final budget. That would be a higher priority for me. I do think we need a public awareness campaign. I'm not sure that the legislature or the state of Washington is the right entity to lead that. I also think we need to incorporate more climate science into our curriculums in science classes in schools.
That's great for kids and their parents. But I agree that the state legislature is not the right messenger. But you can award a contract or a responsibility to a state agency, like Puget Sound Clean Air Agency or Department of Ecology, because those people can do public campaigns. They can hire the Ad Council to do a really great professional public campaign.
Yeah, I mean we'll have to look at that. This is a new idea, and then we'll just have to think about whether or not that's the best way for us to spend those dollars in terms of addressing this crisis.
Great, thank you.
Question for Eileen.
Okay, so have you had a chance to review Representative Khanna's state-based universal health care bill? If so, any thoughts? Representative Ro Khanna?
Is from California.
Well, I mean, I don't know what that one is. Is it a single payer proposal or a? Well, I I will say that if it's a state-based single payer, I'll just put it out there, as I've said before, we can't do that as a state, because we have to get all of the waivers from the feds. You have to. Oh, it's a Congress. Oh, then that's different. They can get that passed. That's a different thing. But as state-based, they would have, that would give us the waivers. Is that what the?
Yes.
Oh.
That is what that bill does.
Yeah. Well, if it gives us the waivers, that's a different story. And the money. I will just have the waivers and the money. Then we could try and move forward. But until federal action happens, which especially with this administration, I do not see that happening anytime soon. So I guess I'd say don't hold your breath. And what we're trying to do in the meantime is, as you know, we passed the public option last year. We're going to continue to move forward on that. We've got we're supposed to be getting the report back on how much subsidies for the state-based subsidies to be able to help people afford insurance. What that would be should be coming out shortly. And whether or not we can afford those subsidies is another question, but we're certainly working on that. So,
No, I think in that bill by Ro Khanna also is co-signed by our Congresswoman Pramila Jayapal as well. And if they were able to pass it, would change the game in terms of how we can use our toolbox to have it. So certainly support that and getting that passed. But candidly, with the elections coming up, that's where our effort should be as well, to ensure some more systemic changes associated with healthcare.
Okay, so our next question. Let's see if there was a name. Okay, if I could have Rebecca Wells, I'm going to have you up on deck, and while I read this question, just make your way up to the microphone here. So this question is, if the Supreme Court fails to support DACA, can the state of Washington do anything to support them?
That's a tougher one, obviously, because it's on the federal level, but I think we can do a lot of things in Washington State to ensure that, for instance, ICE doesn't have access to any information for residents that are here, expanding health care for folks who are undocumented, and making sure that we have outreach programs to help these communities as well. Candidly, this is a good opportunity to partner with private sector folks. I know a lot of companies around here specifically have hired folks from that community, and we can certainly partner with them as well. So absent of being able to change the federal regulation, I think there are ways to support those communities and let them know that they are safe here in Washington State. But that's a federal level.
Yeah, unfortunately, immigration is one of the issues we have the least ability to impact at the state level, but there are something, one of the bills that we passed this year that Joe is referencing, the Keep Washington Working Act, bans state or local agencies, including local police departments, from collaborating with ICE and from turning people in our state over to ICE, who both DACA recipients and otherwise. Something else that bill did is ban a practice that I wasn't even aware of. In some small school districts, particularly in central Washington, where there's a very large undocumented population, sometimes schools will bring in ICE employees as translators. So they're actually inviting ICE into public schools where a lot of the student population is undocumented to translate into Spanish. That is now banned. So we want to see what else we can do, obviously, but this was a pretty sweeping bill that we did, and if there's other policies out there that other states are pursuing to try to keep undocumented families safe in their state, we want to do those too.
Okay, Rebecca, are you here, or would you like me to read your question? I will read your question. So Rebecca's question is, are you willing to sponsor legislation to get forced arbitration clauses banned in our state?
Yeah.
So the question that we had talking about that was whether this was about labor arbitration or whether it was arbitration for business that I don't know.
Consumer contracts, I think.
Contracts, that's what, so.
Answer how you think you would like to
Of course, my mind
read that.
immediately went to labor arbitrations, and I thought, wait a minute, that doesn't make sense, because most of the time, the only time that labor groups that have arbitration are mandatory we certainly, I wouldn't want to ban that arbitration, so I don't think that's probably.
Well,
what they're
I mean, how about for consumer arbitration? I mean, you could talk about
Yeah.
forced arbitration.
And, that's I don't know whether, I think we can do that. That, it just hasn't been discussed, so I'm not really that familiar with it. I don't really. Yeah, but, we'd certainly be.
Like your contract with your cable company or the phone company or something like that.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think we want forced arbitration clauses in those contracts. I think, yeah, we want to see legislation like that move forward. And we can inquire with our colleagues to see who else is working on that. And that sounds like a fair Stanford bill, maybe. But for labor arbitration, like binding arbitration, mandatory arbitration for labor contracts is a protection for workers. For workers like firefighters or state troopers who are not allowed to go on strike, and so the only leverage that they have over their employer and in contract negotiation is the ability to go to an arbitrator and have the arbitrator settle the contract. I think there's probably more employee groups that deserve access to that protection. Now, for clauses in consumer contracts, yeah, I think those are abusive.
We have another question. This is Ben Riley. Also, Roxanne from Vashon, are you here? There's a question from Roxanne from Vashon. I can read her question after Ben's. This is Ben.
Hi guys. So I'm actually going to take it just one topic back because you actually created a great segue into what I wanted to ask you about. In February 2017, Governor Inslee signed an order limiting Washington's help in enforcing Trump's immigration policies. 11 months later, a report suggested that the Department of Licensing was providing data to ICE. The governor then ordered the DOL to refer all ICE requests to the General Counsel. 4 months ago, several reports showed DOL has continued its cooperation. Can any of you provide some insight about this issue and explain whether the state agencies are or ought to be cooperating with ICE on immigration?
Yeah, they should not be, and they should not be still. So after that came out, I actually talked to the DOL before that report came out to ensure that was not the case. So the instance in which it happened was handled, and there should not be any more collaboration with ICE from Washington State. There will be, and I'll be just perfectly candid, there's one weird instance where Washington State and King County specifically uses a shared database for law enforcement. It doesn't have immigration status, and it doesn't have a person's documentation status by any means. But if they had a list of names and they wanted to cross-reference it, if they had a criminal background, that would be the only potential case. And even then, we're trying to figure out how to limit that use, but that's problematic in a few ways.
Thank you for answering the question. I wasn't really sure what the resolution was, so I appreciate that.
Oh yeah, no, DOL is not, and if they are, there will be some help to pay.
Quick follow-up, just related to the reporting that came out in July, where that was surfaced. Part of the reason why they were accessing the DOL database was to match it with federal facial recognition database maintained by the FBI. Do you guys have any thoughts about passive collection of facial IDs for Washington residents, or whether or not that should be allowed? Particularly if you say, for example, police body cams.
Yep. I'm running that bill right now, actually. Yeah, so we could. I mean, it's a facial recognition technology is a very controversial and a very difficult thing to handle, and right now people are able to use it with impunity. So I'm working with some folks in the Senate and also the House on a sweeping data privacy bill to make sure that our probably the most important thing, which is our identity, is respected and handled appropriately. And it includes facial recognition. So I 100% agree. There's a public sector.
Quick follow-up.
Yeah.
Will that include Ring?
Yes.
Right.
Yeah, it's public and private.
Right, because that's when our canvassers
So,
go out.
Ivan, if you want to ask a question, I would love to have you come up and ask it. I welcome that. Anybody else who has a question would like to come up here, you're more than welcome to do that.
But the answer, one of the major pieces of legislation I'm working on this year is on data privacy, specifically as it relates to facial recognition.
Okay, Roxanne, I will read your question. Vashon has a very high record of pedestrian and car accidents. There are solar-powered, light-up only when passed, Crosswalk lights available to make our streets safe. Gig Harbor has great ones, so do some King County communities. Is it our turn yet? Our turn meaning Vashon.
Should we ask the council member from, because it's actually, most of that kind of stuff is paid for by locals, that's not the state.
It's not a state.
It's not usually, yeah, I think that, but, I mean, you're translating. Yeah, we support it, but but, and it's since 976 passed, it's even gonna be harder to get that kind of stuff paid for.
Yeah, so that's kind of one of the casualties of 976 is a lot of local jurisdictions would pay for transportation, and that would count investments through that. So we would work. I mean, obviously, we want more safety for pedestrians. Let's chat some more with Joe and me and other folks as well to figure out what that might look like.
Next question here is, if the City of Seattle, King County, and Democratic state legislators legally or otherwise challenge the Tim Eyman initiative, how do we avoid the perception that King County voters want to sidestep the will of Washington voters?
People did vote on it in the local jurisdictions, right? So like the state legislature just authorized people to have the ability to dictate how they want to invest their own money. So I don't know if people that don't, so the folks who weren't being impacted by Sound Transit got to dictate how we invested our own dollars. So it just depends on kind of who you call the people, right? Like we serve the people on 34th, and I feel like the outcome was very clear in terms of what we wanted for transportation investments. So if that means I get vilified, I'm totally down to get vilified by Tim Eyman. That's cool with me.
I think that that kind of goes back to the discussion about the price of the car tabs. I mean, $30 car tax is what the state, that's how much the state gets. All the rest of the car tax it's not the state. And I mean, I was unfortunately there when the first $30 car tab passed, and then the state legislature voted to, it got overturned by the courts, and then we put it in statute. I voted against it, I just want everybody to know. But it was, that's, you know, we put it back into statute, so.
Eileen, we voted against that.
Okay, were you
Yes,
there?
I was there.
Okay, we voted.
Section 01.
Okay, so, but it's the problem of, we've got to somehow get the narrative back here, because that's exactly what's happening here, is that Eastern Washington is now dictating to, well, it's not just Eastern Washington, Berks County, but there, you know, it's people that we've managed to get it passed here, and we're the ones that are gridlocked, and Seattle and King County gets vilified immensely in Columbia. Even though, yeah, and like we're the donor county, but everybody else thinks they're the donors, that they're funding us. And so it's really trying to get an education of what the taxes are and who's paying for them and who's getting the benefit is something that we really need to, that's something that the party, we all need to be working on.
And look, this initiative got like less than 52% of the vote. It's not like this is some mandate by the voters. 48% of the people in our state and the overwhelming majority of voters in King County, and even the more overwhelming majority of voters in the 34th district, we don't know precisely how much yet because we don't have the precinct level results, voted no on this. And we're the ones who are screwed. We're the ones who are impacted. We're the ones who are going to lose our bus service, our ferry service, our light rail construction. And I'm sorry that 52% of voters do not, in a low turnout off-year election, should not destroy the transportation future of our state. 52% of voters in the United Kingdom voted for Brexit. That doesn't mean it's a good idea.
Okay, our next question, on behalf of the local Russian-American community, are there any plans within Democratic legislature to engage this particular demographic group in state public policy and voter engagement?
Russian is actually one of the top languages in the Highland School District, right? Not that you know that off the top of your head, but I think there certainly should be engagement overall. If there was more context to that question in terms of probably potential national level discussions, maybe. But yeah, I think everybody should be engaged in terms of accessing our democracy.
Well, I'll just say that we're trying to encourage engagement in all groups. It's not one over another. We certainly, well, I don't get it. There's we've got all sorts of groups within the 34th that are not exactly represented here, if you look around, that we need to work on getting more involved.
Especially considering what is going on in the country and what's going on in the world, and just the idea of the Russian-American community specifically, I think is what this questioner was interested in. I would like to ask just one more, we're taking a few seconds of a break. If anybody else has a question they would like to ask, a written question, please write it down and pass it up here. We would really like to have your questions be heard and relay them to the legislature. So please send up your questions if you have any.
Okay, so this person was recently was shocked to learn that jets and planes discharge their fuel before landing, and they are particularly concerned about Vashon, over which all planes fly on. Are you aware of any remediation efforts?
We're debating that we don't even know that that's necessarily true on the discharge. It should not be true. Yeah, I think they do it if it's like an emergency landing. I know, but that because it costs too much money.
Well, so yeah, we want to know about that. If planes are dumping fuel, yes, that's a problem. Even when our planes are not dumping their fuel, they are dumping exhaust, and particularly ultrafine pollution, which is a different category of pollution than the pollution that comes off of gasoline and diesel trucks. I was just in a meeting yesterday with Representative Tino Orwell, Senator Karen Kaiser, Representative Mia Gregerson from our neighboring district, the 33rd district, which is highly impacted by CTAC. A number of legislators and public health experts were there talking about, for the first time, we're actually looking at what are the impacts of that ultrafine matter coming off of jet fuel, particularly when landing. Landing is when this pollution is most emitted, and it's our communities, I live in White Center, it's our communities that are in those flight paths and that are experiencing most of that ultrafine pollution. So we don't know what the solution is quite yet. We do think that sustainable aviation biofuels, which the bill I was talking about earlier would help advance, emit fewer of those ultrafine particulate matter, but we're at least taking the first steps of really anywhere that I know about, any airport community that I'm aware of, to look at where, what are those levels of that ultrafine matter coming out of jet fuel, and so that we can start to wrap our head around what to do to stop it.
I have a pre-sent-in question from Meg Van White. Is Meg here? Meg, come and make your way up to the microphone while we have a live question here from Leah Griffin.
Thank you. Thanks for being here. I know there are a lot of people in this room who care a lot about this community and the state and getting involved. And I was wondering, what are some really specific, tangible ways that community members can reach out to you? What are the best ways to approach our reps and state senator in order to have the impact that we want to have in the state?
Just quickly to give you a little bit of context, the state legislature last year passed transformative things like Joe had mentioned, and the reason why we were able to do that was because of really three people. Three people flipped their seats from Republican to Democrat, and that changed the entire, thank you, Tina, and that changed the entire dynamic of the legislature. So what's interesting is that with just a few people, you can actually transform a whole system. So one of the biggest things is getting involved, not just on the campaign side, but actively engage on issues that you care about. Bea is fantastic. She, by the way, waited in line for 6 hours to speak with Senator Warren when she was in town and got her to co-sign a bill. Like do that. Like, not everybody can do that, but that was impressive. So things like that is, if you care about specific issues, definitely speak up and talk about it, because at the end of the day, time is a finite resource, and oftentimes we need help advocating for certain things, and we need people to champion issues as well.
And I would just say, I know all of us meet with people regularly, constituents every day, and the constituents are our first priority. I think I've seen many of you at CME Coffee over the years. That's where my coffee was shot, and so I think that, anytime, if you have a specific issue, we're all open to having a meeting, but many of you are already involved in different groups that come down regularly, and so that we know what issues you're active on. But if we don't know, just give us a call to set up an appointment. That's the easiest thing.
Well, I agree. We every day we're meeting with constituents, hearing about issues that are important to them. So we're happy to do that. Of course, coming down during Olympia is great. Those meetings tend to be pretty short because the days are pretty packed during the session. But also, for me, everybody's different. For me, email is usually the best way to get a hold of me. I get hundreds of emails a day, so I'm not always able to get back to you right away. But I do see those, and that for me is the best way to reach out to me. I know there's other legislators that prefer phone calls, prefer handwritten letters, or whatever. But I think that for most of us, email is a pretty good way to get an issue before us and to make sure that we know what's on your mind.
So this is Meg Van White. She has a question.
Hi, this is Ashley for Eileen, and Joe can weigh in too. Every day we're getting studies about the ill effects of young children on screens, digital media. I included in my question 2 links to a study that shows a lower brain size to children in front of screens versus children that didn't have it. There's also OT is seeing a lot of children that have really weak grips because they're not holding pens and pencils and crayons because they're on screens. I see my local school district is spending a lot of money on digital media and hardware and software. They need to be regulated because I think what is happening is not healthy for our children, and we're paying for it in our property tax. I would like you, Eileen, and Joe, because you're on technology, to issue some sort of health study about this, so districts can get ideas of how much screen time children should have, and also recess, where we're not getting a recess like we used to. And I was wondering if you would consider some sort of study.
Well, I think that I understand your question. I'm just trying to figure out where the best place to have it studied is, because that's a pretty big topic. Yeah, it's really nationalist. It is something that should be a bigger. So I'm not sure that whether we have the wherewithal to actually do it, but we can talk. I've been to a meeting with Rundle, so.
The state of Maryland is doing it, and I can send you the information about it. But our schools really need some help.
So, send it so that we know
I will
who's
send
doing
it to you.
it.
Yeah, the state of Maryland is doing it, because they want to issue guidelines. Thank you very much.
No, thank you. I have young kids, and I'm very mindful of that as well. I'm probably the worst offender of screens, so I should probably pay attention more to that.
Okay, here's another question from the audience. Any chances to review alternative form of regulation, and that's in quotes, in WTUC, I hope I'm getting that right, which excuses internet service providers and telephone service providers from regulations? Do you know about that? Is net neutrality part of that, or is...
Very quickly. 3 years ago, I tangled with CenturyLink. I bought into their idea of going to the fiber optic, and all kinds of weird charges and strange things were going on, sufficient to get me angry enough to file a complaint. The Utility Commission, which handles that kind of thing, told me that I couldn't have that complaint because in 2007, the legislature passed alternative form of regulation and empowered the commission to come up with regulations, and they were convinced by the internet and telephone companies that, gee whiz, seeing how there was so much competition, that would certainly ensure the residents of the state of Washington to have very good service for very low price, and therefore it was not necessary to regulate them, and therefore kaput on my complaint. So anyway, I can't believe I'm the only one in the state of Washington that's run into this problem, and I don't know that it's directly related to community broadband, but I would certainly like to support community broadband, and anyway, I think that ought to be regulated.
Yeah, well, I think this sounds like a consumer protection issue as well, so I think maybe even looking in the AG, so not necessarily having legislation per se, but that's how we probably start this conversation. Well, just send me an email, we'll figure it out.
This is Aaron with a question for you.
All right. Quick answer, it's less than 1% Russian in Highland School District. There's 101 different primary languages within the school district. English and Spanish can be taught too. My question though is around capital facilities. Washington State has a 60% threshold for getting a bond passed, which makes it really difficult to get bonds passed. Highland School District went basically 10 years without getting a bond passed and really hurt the conditions of different school buildings. So my question would be, how can we lower that threshold?
Yeah, we actually voted on that last year. It's 60% of the previous election too, so it's potentially even higher depending on the year that you do it. So being strategic about when you vote on it is one of the most important things. We actually had a bill last year that we voted on the floor, and no Republicans supported funding schools, essentially is what happened. So I think the threshold is fungible. So that one is specifically 50%, I think is what we put it. But we can play with what that number might look like in order to get enough support. Because that's one of the most important things is if you look at the future of our economy in our state, it really starts in our education system, which is why you ran for school board. And what's funny is that Washington State, King County is actually not bad about, not great, but not bad about passing the levies for schools. Eastern Washington, like a desert. Like those kids are being impacted tremendously because of this regulation as well. So I agree. There are a couple of bills that are live associated with this, but then that could go. Yeah, we're going to ballot. But yeah, so it's a constitutional amendment, so you need more than 60% of people that would have to do it, or it goes on the ballot.
Yeah, I think all three of us strongly support, making that a majority vote. To amend the state constitution, we need 2/3 of the House, 2/3 of the Senate, and then a majority of the people of the state to vote. Yeah, so it's a pretty tough process. And as Joe said, Republicans are not voting for this. So hopefully someday we'll have 2/3 in both the House and the Senate, or maybe some Republicans will come to their senses.
Well, it used to be levies and bonds, and we cut a deal with the Republic Department. Do you remember that? And that's when we got the support. They supported getting levies and bringing that down, so at least we got that happening. We've been working on trying to get both of them done.
But I'll tell you, when I know there were a couple of times the Highline bond failed, and it failed just like by a hair, right? Like 59%. My sister and her husband, who have 3 school-age kids and were living in Burien at the time, they had just moved home from out of state and they were living in Burien. And when that bond failed, that was a signal to them that they didn't feel confident enough in the capital facilities of the Highland School District. They wanted to put their kids in Highland schools, and so they moved, and they don't live in Burien anymore. And God bless them, they live on First Island. They got great schools there. But you think about how many families make decisions like that. You think about how many families are seeing the impacts to their kids' future when something like that fails for this totally arbitrary reason. So we got to fix that. it's a high bar, but you know, if we elect enough Democrats, then I think we can do it.
Our next question comes from Dale Phelps.
Thanks for being here tonight. I really appreciate it. This is my first time coming to a meeting like this. First of many, exactly. So, having spent 40 years in the tech industry, obviously Mark Zuckerberg went before the U.S. Congress and stated his opinions as far as First Amendment. Is there anything that can be done at the state level to basically allow for truth in advertising on the social media? Obviously, Microsoft owns LinkedIn. They're a local company. Something would be there. Google has a tremendous presence here. How can we do that at the state level? Is there anything to do it? Or does that infringe upon net neutrality? Does it infringe upon the First Amendment? Or, you know, I know it's a very complex issue, but I'm just curious what can be done at the state level.
Yeah, even if it's not legislation, so the PDC is the one that regulates the ads right now. So the reason why there are no political ads in Washington, or there shouldn't be political ads in Washington State, is because of the stringent requirements we have on political ads. So even if you can't control what is said, which First Amendment rights, I support people's rights to free speech, we can at the very least know who's paying for it. So that's probably one of the biggest levers that we have, is understanding where it's coming from and who's paying for it. But you're right, I think it's going to require a partnership, not just at the federal level, but with the tech companies themselves. I've been talking specifically to Facebook about, so what's funny is that they read my tweets, government affairs teams there, and I tweeted about that kind of in an angry tone, and they called me about it to figure out how we can partner up to make sure that this is a bit more equitable. So it's a work in progress. I don't know if there's an easy, well, there is not an easy answer. Talking trash to presidential candidates is probably not the best way to do it, but I'm trying to figure that out as well right now. So I don't have the answer, but let's work on this.
We have a question from Mayor Jimmy Mata.
Well, first of all, thank you for the work you do there in Olympia, but I have a big concern for White Center, South Park, and specifically Burien, and it's the gang violence that we're seeing. There's a difference between youth violence and youth on youth violence, and then there's gang enterprises. And to me, it's frustrating, concerning when we're having a message from the Walla Walla Penitentiary basically saying, let the peewee shoot, let the kids shoot, because they're not going to get any time. So recently we had a 17-year-old kid caught with a gun graffitiing our walls. And to me, it's a public safety issue when we're ignoring the graffiti on the walls. This is a situation that's going on in Moses Lake, Tri-Cities, Yakima. Little Valley locals are moving into Kent. United Locotes are joining forces with them. MS-13 from Auburn has moved now to White Center. They're operating their infrastructure. So there's a difference between organized crime and youth on youth violence, right? So to me, I want to make sure that there's a distinction there. And then last year, we actually put a plan together as Burien, it went in the governor's budget. Next thing I know, it was ignored. So I'm going, look, we got an issue when we have a woman who's working at a chiropractor office about ready to spoon her lunch and she gets shot and killed. We have an issue when we have a 13-year-old girl, a 17-year-old girl shot over in Arturo Apartments. We have an issue when we can't find any funding to at least put some art that connects to some of the more poorest areas in our district. So this is a passionate issue. I didn't think I had to be in Olympia to educate our House representatives and senators that we got a definite issue here when it comes to gang violence and structured violence against our community. To me, there's messages in that graffiti. Now you got Southside locals, Little Valley locals who are connected with MS-13. And so to me, it's concerning, right? I have a daughter, I have neighbors, and I can see the frustration that comes about. Now in Burien, 24 hours we removed that graffiti. And so I'm hoping that, we get some funding, some studies, something that it's a priority for us, because when you have gangs moving from Eastern Washington to our local community up in Everett, Monroe, and Linwood, we definitely got a public safety issue around our state. Thank you.
Completely agree. If you can forward me what that budget request was, I'd be happy to take a look. I didn't actually see that, but I think one of the fundamental things that we should do So I work on the Human Services Committee, and juvenile justice and just justice reform is a very big deal for me to break the schools to prison pipeline. And I get that the organized crime is separate, but one of the things that they do is they feed off of our community and our youth. If you look at Burien specifically, right now the city spends about 51% of the budget on law enforcement because we have to. We spend less than 1% on youth services. So is that correct? I think it's like $20,000 around there. One of the biggest things that we can do is invest in our youth and give them things to actually do that gives them an opportunity to kind of get outside. So for me, I'm very much against youth detention. So we can build more community facilities that divert people from a potential path that may not be a positive one. So it's kind of twofold, is what Mayor Mata is talking about, and I think also investing in our youth and investing in our kids, because if you look at how the way the money is spent right now, I don't think we're doing enough for our kids. But I want to see what that budget request was.
What can you as legislators do to address the spread of white nationalism and the radicalized terror groups proliferating in our state?
Well, I guess I'd say not, I mean, yeah, I guess that's true. We have a bill about hate speech, but it's, yeah, we can't say. That would be our first thing. You know, hate.
I cannot hear you.
Talk into the mic.
Well, I mean, we have a member of the state legislature who's from Spokane Valley, who's very tied in with the white nationalist militia movement in eastern Washington and northern Idaho. So something that, one of the things that we can do is go elect somebody new in Spokane Valley. I want to give a shout out to Tina Pawlowski and the state party who have done a really important, a lot of important work of calling attention to that.
Go to our website, cancelmattshea.com. It will show you how he's connected and all the groups throughout the state he's connected to.
Do we have a candidate for against him?
Yes, we do have a candidate to run against him. I can't tell you yet who. Yeah.
Stay tuned.
Yeah.
Martha, we have a question from Martha Coaster. Martha, do you want to ask your question? We're going to have to just come on up, and you'll be next up on the dock. All right. So this is a question for Senator Wynn. Why does it take 4 months to approve licensing for new PAs, MDs, and RNs? Or Eileen, any of you can answer, please feel free.
Yeah, I was going to say, I don't think that's Joe's question, that's mine. Well, it depends, 4 months for all of those? I don't know that that's necessarily accurate. There's been problems with getting some licensure. It's also from getting it from the information from other states. I've actually had people contact me about, different employers because they've been trying to hire individuals, and it's California has been really bad because we get a lot of nurses, this is specifically on nurses, coming out of California, and they don't get their information up from California fast enough for them to get employed. So that's part of it, but there had been a big backlog of looking into trying to get the licensure, and so the department has moved, they've got a whole plan that's, if you can go onto their website and see how they have reappropriated some of their people to try and get some of their backlog moved forward. So hopefully that is getting resolved. Part of it was happened because we didn't appropriate, we didn't allow them to spend some of the money that they had in the health services account. So it's getting sorted through. But the other thing that we're looking at now, there's big discussions on, is different background, employers do background checks, we do background checks, each agency has a different background check. So we're looking at doing it, trying to have a simple, easier way to get background checks done and just have one portal for that.
So this question is from Martha Coaster.
Yes, I wanted to know what you thought of whether direct lawsuits against an initiative 796 stand a chance or not.
Yeah, I mean, there's a pattern that has happened. We took a look at it before, and it's crafted different this time. So I think the lawsuits has a chance, but it's not an easy. It won't be an easy path. And fundamentally, I still think systemically we need to fix our regressive tax structure. Is one of the main problems because per capita, Washington State's one of the lowest, even with the car tabs and with the tolls and everything, one of the lowest in the United States per capita for investments in transportation. But yeah, so the answer is yes, but we need to fix our system.
None of us are lawyers, so we can speculate. But the lawsuit was just filed today, and the lead plaintiff is actually not Seattle, and it's not King County, and it's not Sound Transit. The lead plaintiff is the Garfield County Public Transportation Benefit Area. Garfield County is the smallest county in the state. It's got about 1,000 people in it. Voted 2/3 for Donald Trump. At the same time that they voted for Donald Trump, they voted 2/3 for Donald Trump in the 2016 November election, they voted by an even bigger margin. They voted to approve a sales tax to set up the first transit agency they've ever had in Garfield. They voted a bigger margin to impose a tax on themselves to run buses in their tiny little county, and they voted for, Donald Trump. So they're the lead plaintiff in this lawsuit. They're filing. There's 7 different reasons that they are alleging 976 is unconstitutional. I don't know they're going to win on all 7, but I think there's a real good chance, and I hope we get an answer soon.
Okay, this will be our last question for the night. How are we coming with legislation banning assault weapons and high-capacity magazines, and what priority level would these pieces of legislation receive?
High priority.
I'm trying to remember what the bill, Well, I'll just phrase it this way. There's probably a better chance of things moving now than it were a year ago with the change in the Speaker's office, because Representative Jenkins, who is the first woman Speaker, she's got a public health background and has been very strong on trying to move forward using a public health approach to guns. So I think that we'll see some differences.
Yeah, I think those are high priority for gun safety. And there's also new things that we can do. So California has gun violence prevention. If you look at it, statistically, it's not hard to decipher who is going to be potentially a victim of gun violence, largely because it's domestic violence and suicides. So in addition to the assault rifles and the high-capacity magazines, we can also invest in programs to help people before that becomes an option.
And let me just say that while we have not yet passed legislation to ban high-capacity magazines or assault weapons, I think that the high-capacity magazines probably is going to happen before the assault weapons ban. I think that was a little closer to the finish line. This was a very productive year when it comes to gun violence prevention in the legislature. We passed legislation that said if there's a domestic violence incident and the police assess that there's a risk, and there's a gun in the home, that there's assessed that there's a risk that subsequent to that incident that gun will be used, because there's one of the most frequent times that people are killed or wounded by gun violence is in the immediate aftermath of a domestic violence incident. Now the police are required to remove the gun from that home. That's a huge win. There was also a great bill by Senator Moncadingra, the hero who flipped the Senate, that it used to be that if you're found guilty of a felony, you lose your gun rights. If you're found not guilty by reason of insanity, you didn't. So that's kind of like one of those head scratchers, I can't believe we had to do a bill on that, but we couldn't get it through until we flipped the Senate with Moncadingra's help and then expanded the majority in 2018 in both chambers. Now, if you're found not guilty by, not categorically remove your gun rights, but if it's a violent crime and the court finds that there's a risk, then you do lose your gun rights. That's going to save lives. And those were just 2 of the, I think, 5 or 6 good gun bills. None of them as sexy as an assault weapons ban or a high-capacity magazines ban. But we did, in the previous year, 2018, we banned bump stocks immediately on the heels of the Las Vegas shooting. So we are making forward progress on gun violence prevention for the first time in many, many decades. The biggest stuff we still have to get done.
Well, thank you.